Beyonce's new album, Cowboy Carter, is like driving a McLaren on your backcountry roads. But is it cohesive? All right, so as always, we're talking about cohesive albums. We're grading our experience of this music based on how the whole track listing affected us emotionally. And so we're going to do that with 3 pillars. We're doing it with our narrative, lyrics, themes, story you're telling. Next is texture, your instruments, your production, tone of everything, how it's made to feel. And finally, dynamic, the highs and the lows, and how you navigate between the highs and the lows. And then you get 1 extra point for the experience as a whole working together to be cohesive. Each one of those out of 3, experience points 1. We're doing it out of 10. Let's roll. So, context for Cowboy Carter. This is following up, I think 5 years after Renaissance, a giant track listing of crazy, very Beyonce record in terms of it being really illustrious melodically, crazy heavy on vocals, but really, really intense musicality as well. I love how she has musicians in all of her tracks just do what they do best and like show off. It's so cool. And Renaissance felt like her pure pop, as intense as she could go. And then she kind of talked about recording Cowboy Carter and the why behind it and wanting it to be a very reflective album of her experience in the American music scene and trying to define a new American sound. And that's the coolest thing you can do as a pop star, to utilize an authentic expression, influence it for the culture. That's what you should do as a pop star, in my opinion. And Beyonce's doing it. Super cool.
Super cool.
So this is following up Renaissance, and it's got very similar energy, but it's got a very, very different flavor. And it's a fun thing to tackle. If you listen to Renaissance right before Cowboy Carter, you'll get the same heart-pounding, intense energy in the listen, but you'll definitely get 2 very different experiences on the listen. So that's kind of what we're heading into when we listen to this record. All right, so we're starting with Beyonce's narrative for Cowboy Carter. This is an American songwriter, rootsy-based type of narrative. It's trying to feel very homegrown, very personal, very intimate, but also have all of the different depth that any Beyonce pop record would have. I would definitely say this has got the same fun energy and more oriented around being about the having a good time type thing that a normal pop record would be about. But there are moments like in Protector, or even Yaya has some fun, intimate emotions tied into like a pop banger. There are tons of little tracks that you sneak in some genuine emotion that you wouldn't expect. But for the most part, this is an anthology. This is Beyonce telling a lot of different American stories, trying to utilize Americana and folk and different instrumentations of those types of genres, and a lot of different country singers of previous generations and new generations to bring out a more unified type of story. And the best way to describe how this narrative is those little radio interludes in between tunes where Willie Nelson or Dolly Parton will come in and start talking like you're on an American radio show. And it just feels like you're just selecting random songs off a jukebox, and they just happen to be all of Beyonce's best tracks to date. It's the coolest thing. I love the way that she constructed the feeling and the themes to be American, but in a very loose sense. You're getting like the diaspora of all the different influences that Willie Nelson and Dolly Parton and all the other singers, like even Miley Cyrus and Post Malone, who sang on here, all of their influences are sprinkled in to the record. But for the most part, it's a Beyonce record. But as far as it goes, I couldn't have been more impressed with the way it was presented. And we're starting with a 3 out of 3 on the narrative, because that's proper. All right, next is texture. Next, we're talking about how a Beyonce sound interacts with a country sound. Most people would think it wouldn't. And whenever I tell someone who hasn't listened to this record that it's a Beyonce country record, they say, oh, great, I'm not going to listen to that. And that's a darn shame. But what I was really impressed with was these textures that she pulls out of this record somehow fuse really, really nicely Beyonce sound, which is R&B, dance pop, and even some smoother jazz elements, into a ton of acoustic instruments. And you guys know from the Billy review. The more acoustic instruments I get, the better. The banjos, the acoustic guitars, the pianos, the drums that are all over this thing, even the electric guitars, like right off of the bat on 16 carriages, holy smokes. Everything feels super organic, but what's really important about this is that Beyonce is not singing over a country record here. This is a Beyonce record that country and Western musicians are playing on. That's a huge difference, and it actually plays to her favor. So Beyonce should never have that pop essence taken out of her music. She's got the dazzle, she's got the presentation, the shock factor of just how extraordinary she can present things. So this is still a Beyonce record, and the music is still very much her. The biggest instrument in this record, just like any good pop record should be, her vocals, the amount of vocal layering that is all over every single track. It does not matter what she's on. It doesn't matter how minimal the track is. Like that Blackbird recording I thought was really, really well done. It's a really nice cover, even though it's not an American song, but we'll move past it. To infuse it with Beyonce's feel by having a choir of 30 Beyoncés over it, that's just how you do it. It was very convincing because it felt like her, because if you want a Beyonce sound, you're probably going to layer 30 different vocals on top of whatever it is that you're singing. And so you've got all the banjos playing, you've got all of the amazing instruments. I think you've got Paul McCartney, you've got Post Malone might have played some guitar in this. Rhiannon Giddens, which I've now listened to a lot of her stuff, and holy smokes, I'm so glad she played banjo on this thing. It was extraordinary. Paul McCartney, Nile Rodgers, just like a classic case of if they're on it, it's probably going to be elevated. And all of the instrumentations were really elevated because it felt like it was the big show of Beyonce with these extra feelings. So it wasn't Beyonce walking into a Western bar feeling out of place. It was like you were at a Beyonce recording session and all the country musicians were hanging out with her, and it felt cohesive because they were all leaning into her sound and feeling out how she wanted to present it. Textures, dadgummit, she did it again. I'm going to give her a 3 out of 3. Now, if we're talking about dynamics, why do I always get mean about dynamics? Because I want an experience. Darn it. And you can write an amazing batch of pop songs that just blow my mind, make me cry, make me dance, get me all hyped and inspired. But if I'm going to listen to it back to front, I'm going to want to listen to the whole thing. And unfortunately, this sucker is an hour and 18 minutes long. And that's not a problem for every album. But if you have the intensity that Beyonce's music has, dynamically, all the highs and all the lows, you might kind of get tired of driving down your country roads on a McLaren for an hour and 18 minutes straight. You kind of might want to either slow down or get on the interstate and get somewhere quicker. I don't know. So unfortunately, you get to the halfway point of this record, which it's split right down the middle, which is always refreshing because if you're on the odyssey of this back to the front of this record, even if it is fun and enjoyable and dancey and you're connecting with it and everything, you can get some fatigue. There's just not a lot of people have the attention spans to handle that much influx of information and inspiration all at once. It's a lot to take in. So her highs felt like through the ceiling skyscraper levels. They felt as high as they should. Beyonce is the best at making those top crazy energy adrenaline rushes of songs, and I'm so glad that she does. And the bottom of the bottoms are amazing, and they're beautiful, and they're tender, and you feel really close, but they're one after another like every single time. And that's a fun experience for a roller coaster, but an hour and 18 minutes of a roller coaster can kind of get jarring a little bit. So what I kind of wanted is a more distinct pause between the first half of the album and the second, and a bit of a breather in between tunes. I know they have that Willie Nelson song right in the middle, but I would have liked more of a slow transition out of the first half into a skyrocketing second half. That would have been fun. And there were a couple of tunes, to be honest, that did not add to the experience of this roller coaster or of this car ride. This is a thrill ride all the way through, but there were parts of it, like a couple of songs that I could have taken or left would have been Tyrant or Daughter. They just didn't quite push the energy the way that the rest of the songs did. The low songs pushed it just as well as the high ones, but Desert Eagle and Tyrant and, like I said before, Daughter didn't quite take you anywhere else, and that's kind of a shame. But at this point, I'm kind of nitpicking my favorite roller coaster of the year so far. So all that to say, we're just going to give it 1 point off. Dynamics have a 2 out of 3. For our experience point, talking about the entire album all working together cohesively, I love the textures and I love the narrative. I love everything that this album is about. It's one that I'll recommend to everyone. However, I'm so sorry, Beyonce. I'm so sorry. But I'm going to not give her the experience cohesive point. I needed more concentration. Most of her records are an hour. Some of her deluxe editions get up to 1 hour and 20, and that's fine. But the majority of her albums have been an hour, and I think an hour would have been perfect, but it's just missing this succinctness. And I've listened through the album 4 or 5 times, and I'm so glad that I have, and I'll probably do it again. But the more often I want to listen to this album, I kind of just start hand selecting the bangers or the ones that I've connected with the most rather than the whole thing. And there are a lot more albums that I'll just listen back to front to the whole thing because it's part of the story. But I think Beyonce kind of sacrificed that tightness for the sake of everything else that she wanted to say. And I'm glad that she did. I think overall that's a very worthy exclusion in terms of what you include in an album for the sake of everything else that she got. And also, Beyonce, that's an 8 out of 10. That's very, very good. Yeah, in terms of cohesion, she gets an 8 out of 10 because, holy smokes, there's very few parts of this entire hour and 18-minute listen that I went, can we skip this? And most albums, I want to skip at least 3 to 4 songs. But that might just be because I'm a picky eater, so to speak. So that's what I rated the album based on how I experienced it. But I would love to hear how you experienced the album and what you would give it a rating based on these guys. Drop a comment down below on which albums I should review next in this way, what your favorite album is, and how you would describe whether it's cohesive or not, or whether that even matters to you or not. But obviously, I'm going to do this for at least every other album I've listened to, and I'll be taking requests on which reviews I should do and everything. So obviously subscribe. I'd very much like it if you join the fam. We'd love to hear your opinions on these things and join the community that we've got going on here when we talk about music. Thanks to Bryant Creative for the AV edit production. Now go listen to some new music. Yeehaw.